So yeah, this talk is about progressive web apps, and it's got the subtitle of Earning Your Users' Trust. So it's going to kind of serve as like a good, I hope, a good introduction to what progressive web apps are and how to build them, why you should build them, kind of that stuff. And then I want to move into what I think is like a pretty interesting thing, which is like how they can really differentiate themselves and like how each progressive web app can kind of provide a unique experience for how app-like it is or how much like a website it is, those kind of things. Cool. So I'm John. I work at Adobe doing a bunch of cool web technology stuff. Before that, I was at a startup called Brave, and before that, I was at Twitter for a long time. And I really like a lot of the things that progressive web apps touch. So I really like performance. I really like JavaScript. I really like providing good user experiences. Like I've always done client work, and I really, really enjoy like the people side of things. So what this is not a PWA versus native apps talk, because I don't think that there's really much of an argument there. I think your company can look at their own analytics and make up your own decisions about what kind of stuff you should build or shouldn't build. And if anything, man, so that heart looks so cute on my editing screen. It's like pink with little stars on it. Or did I? No, it just. Oh, there. Look at that. Look at that. That's what I should. Anyway. So yeah, but this is like a progressive web apps love native apps talk. And what I mean by that is like, you're all one company, right? Your job that you work for. Like, so it's not really about battling, like I'm on the mobile web team and I'm battling against the native team. It's all about like, you own a team and what's the best experience you can provide. So to get started, how many of you have heard of PWAs or progressive web apps? How many of you have like a really good understanding of the requirements for like what a progressive web app needs to be? Okay, cool. So that was like pretty close to all and then none, which is like awesome. That's like the perfect, we're good. So what is a PWA? It is nonsense made up by Google, right? It's not a real thing, right? I mean, it's becoming a real thing as things do, but basically it's like this term similar to like responsive design. Like what does it really mean? Like who gives you the check mark, right? And like right now when it comes to progressive web apps, for the most part, it's like Google made this list. They made this tool called Lighthouse, which we'll get into, and you got to kind of follow the rules if you want to be in the cool club. But it's also a relative thing, right? So like there are tons of little steps along the way where you might not be like a full Lighthouse 100 progressive web app, but you have some of these really cool features at your disposal. So it's really something that it's not something that you need to jump ship all the way into or all the way out of. It's something that you should just like think about, like, oh, could we offer this cool thing? Would our customers like that? So here's like a little video of one. So this person opens up their browser. They search for Chrome Dev Summit. They click on a link. The link loads the website, and then that little thing pops up. It's like, oh, do you want to add this to your home screen? They're like, yeah, I do. So now you can see, boom, this little thing got added. So now when they click that on their home screen, it opens right up to that site. And you'll notice that it's not in a Chrome window anymore. So that's kind of this basic idea where like progressive web apps, I'm going to move this because it keeps repeating. Progressive web apps, they kind of start blurring this line between like what we think about as a site and what we think about as an app. And they're really flexible in that they're free to kind of do so as much or as little as they want. So to go through some of the features of like, not necessarily all, these things aren't all like what progressive web apps are, but this is more so a list of all the cool stuff that you can do with web apps today. So they can support offline mode. This is probably like the biggest thing, but pre-progressive web apps, like if you have a website that's got a really good mobile experience and you're on BART and you have no phone service and you open it up and you get nothing, right? Whereas if you have an app and you open that app up, you might get really stale information, but at least there's like 5 tweets that you can just read over and over and over and over again, right? It's pretty nice. And so like similarly, you can kind of start doing these like same things where you can have like really cool caching systems, and like it can get really advanced too. Like so, like the kind of first level of it is have something to show when your app is offline. When somebody goes to your site and it's offline, you have something cached that you can show. And it moves all the way up into a lot of people these days are providing like really immersive experiences where they kind of batch up, they let you make actions, assuming that one day they'll connect to the internet again and those actions will succeed. So you could like be on Twitter and you could be clicking like on things, or you could be on Facebook and you could write a status update. And of course it can't magically post it for you, but it'll be like, cool, I got it. They'll keep it in some local storage and then when it connects again. So again, like these open up like a lot of really cool ideas depending on your app. What experience should you offer? all the way from, because it really seems to me like the "you are offline dinosaur," as cute as the dinosaur is not what you want to be saying, right? Like at the very least you could give some information like, hey, the reason that you're not seeing status updates is because you're offline right now. Best case scenario, you provide like a really immersive app and people can do 90% of what they could do online. They saved a home screen. So this is going to be kind of the crux of the talk, right? Is like it's going to be like about native apps and about progressive web apps and about kind of finding your way to that home screen, which I think is like one of the ultimate goals. I don't know how many of you are app developers in some way, but that's like the goal, right? You make this really cool thing and you really think everybody's going to like it, and they probably will like it, and you're like, how do I get on? I just want to get on your phone. Like let me on that phone. And I think progressive web apps are like a really cool way to do that. So they pop up this little button, and then it saves your phone, and then from then on, it's pretty much indistinguishable from a native app. Another cool point here, which I'll circle back to later, is that this does so without the need of an app store, right? So you kind of are circumventing something, and that's interesting. I don't know that it's necessarily a pro, but it is worth noting that like instead of being in these like walled gardens of the Google Play or the Apple Store, or the Microsoft Windows Store, like you're able to like, this is like peer-to-peer, right? Like they go to your site, and then you're like, hey, add me, and then they're like, boom, and you're just added. That's it. There's no code review. There's no like anything to go through. So it's interesting. They can provide push notifications. So some of you may have seen this even on desktop websites where you'll start getting notifications that come up that look native on your Mac or on your Windows PC. But this will work for phones too. So you'll get a very traditional push comes through, and we'll show a little video of it later. They can do really cool things. This is where they kind of also spread out into like things that don't always get lumped in the progressive web app category, but it's worth noting that like certain browsers have been adding all these really cool, really advanced APIs. And so one of them is this web share API that you can find in Chrome. And it allows you to seamlessly share things natively as opposed to having to like go to the URL, copy the link, then go and you open up your Facebook chat and then you paste the link in. This allows you to share it much like native apps share with each other. Similarly, one that I'm really excited about as far as like going forward goes is they have these web payments APIs where you save a credit card to Chrome, and then any apps that you use from within your Chrome browser, you can just opt to use this saved credit card that Chrome hopefully securely stores. But that means all these PWAs, if they're just a little Chrome shell, they'll have full access to this. So you'll start to be able to do like really neat stuff like take payments in a safe way. They can also do really cool things like there's a face detection progressive web app API that's in Chrome. I think it's in like Chrome Nightly right now, and you can actually like play with it where you can send it an image, and then I wish I wrote down the API. It's something like find faces or something like that is like the API call. So you give it an image and it tells you the coordinates of any faces it found, which is pretty sweet. So I think that like we can kind of start seeing this shift of like, this is loaded, right? This is not me being like, you should all build progressive web apps. This is like, let's be like conscious of what's going on in our industry, right? Because now Google, in a lot of ways, has become, like Chrome has become an application framework, right? You're not building websites that necessarily work in all the browsers, and we'll get into that later. Like you can start building, and they're really shipping Chrome-only features like pretty often, which has its own a lot of implications to it. Again, I'm not like totally pro, but I'm not against either. And like I think we've seen this, like a lot of people are burned. I don't know if you're older developers, you might be like flashing back to the like IE only days, or like even when sometimes like different websites, like one would be please use IE and the other one would be like please don't use IE, and like it's really, but it's interesting. Like so we're getting all of these like kind of Chrome specific, or some are WebKit specific APIs to use. Are they ready? This is a question I get asked a lot. Like, oh, okay, so like, am I ready to just build a PWA? And can that be the only native app that I have? No, they're not quite ready. So the problem here, not to pick on Safari, is that's like Safari is the default browser that you get on your iPhone, right? And so if you don't install another browser like Chrome, Safari is pretty far behind as far as progressive web app support. They've been making some really, really awesome moves. I was just talking about this at lunch. Like, so their like service workers are coming, and like everything's really coming. So I have like really high faith in it. But just so you know, right now, like this is a website. It's called Is PWA Ready? And you can go to it, and you can click on Safari, and you can start learning about like what is there, what isn't there, and following up on their roadmap about it. But other than that, like if you have Chrome or Firefox on your phone, or Opera Mini, or any of those browsers, like these are ready. They support service workers and push, and like you really can, people are using them. It's also cool. Another thing is like just to kind of get thinking about is, unlike a native app where like if I make an iOS app, I bundle it, and it can only be used in one context, right? You have to go to the Play Store or peer-to-peer and you have to download this app on an iOS phone. Like that's what you have to do. But progressive web apps, like let's say the support, they're what's the word, like when you're like making websites in a way that falls back gracefully. Well, but there's like a word that people use. Progressive enhanced, yeah, they're progressively enhanced, right? Like, so if you have a web app that supports push notifications and your user is on a browser that doesn't, you don't have a broken experience, you just don't get push notifications, right? That's like very, so they really work. Like, if you make a progressive web app, it's not gonna be broken on Safari. I don't want you to think that. It's just maybe doesn't have all the support that you're counting on. Cool, why you should build one. Okay, before anybody judges this slide, which makes it seem like you really shouldn't build one, let's have a conversation about how native apps work, right? So this is like time spent on your mobile phone. 13% of it is on the web, and 87% of it is in native apps, right? So you're like, oh, I'm not gonna waste my time with these websites, I'm gonna make a native app, that's where it's at, right? But let me pair that with some other statistics, like 80% of the time spent in apps is spent on 3 apps, right? Users have their favorite apps, and that's where they're spending. So if you're like, you know, whatever, Chrome or Facebook, or I don't know what the top 3 or the top 10 are, like maybe you're like, oh, we're really good with our native apps. But if you're not one of those, I imagine you're having a really tough time breaking into that marketplace. Like people do not spend time on a wide variety of apps. And more than that, a lot of statistics say, and this is by country, you can see the average smartphone user only has 26 total apps installed on their phone, right? And it varies a little bit by country. Like you can see the United States, I don't even know how to read this graph. There's some number up there. But again, like, so you're almost like, you just gotta be realistic about kind of the app that you're making. Like, are you making like a top 30 app? Like, are you making one that's like and it's not top 30 for everybody. Obviously, like you have like photographers are more likely to use certain apps and coders or other apps, you know, but are you ready to compete in that steep of a marketplace where like people just do not like to spare that space on their home screen or that space on their phone or anything like that. So it's just a decision that kind of goes into like what you should be building, what you should be spending your energy on, those kind of things. And I think it's really important to consider. So then meanwhile, there's this web platform. And I think this is something that like web evangelists have been pitching for like ever. And it is still true, but like there is this like enormous untapped marketplace of people that have a variety of ability to get on the web, but they have some ability to get on the web. And so what I mean by that is like, so we have like, you know, in America, it's basically everybody's connected to the internet. Everybody has multiple devices that can connect to the internet. And you go all the way into emerging markets and other countries, and maybe they have connection only at work. Or maybe they have, you know, connection at work and at home, but it's a little spotty when they go out. And so like these experiences are all different, and it's important to cater to those. But the thing that's like always mind-blowing about them is there's so many potential people out there. There's so many, if you could find a way to reach different groups of people in different situations, like, so like Chrome itself is reporting 1 billion monthly users, right? Like these are like really big untapped markets. So if you have a really good progressive web app that works really well in Chrome, this is like your target market out of the box. And again, since you're not building specifically for Chrome necessarily, if you do it in a progressively enhanced way, you also get that same shot at all of the mobile Safari and Firefox users. Then there's some really, really interesting stuff going on. And this is like very recent. It's actually cool because I gave like a similar talk last month, and the following slides were like, one day this cool stuff will happen. And then I was like redoing the slides. I was like, oh man, it happened over the last month. It's like so neat. So like Microsoft made this announcement on the 6th. What day is today? Today's the 13th. So they gave an announcement on the 6th that like progressive web apps will now be first-class citizens inside the Windows Store, right? So like when you're on Windows 10 and you go in whatever they call their store, you'll be able to see progressive web apps, and they will be indistinguishable. It'll be like, you can download this, here's the reviews, here's the description, all this stuff. And more than that, what they really want to start doing is they want to start crawling the web and finding apps that meet all these criteria and just sticking them in the store. So this is kind of like a cool, a win-win situation, right? Like I'm sure part of the impetus here is that they don't want their store to feel so empty, right? Like I'm sure they want, who wouldn't want like a couple thousand free, you know? But it works really well for us too, where it's like these are just apps that can be used in a native experience. Like so, I think it's really cool. So then I had this tweet. I was like, imagine a world, which I can really see happening, where like all the big players just crawl the web and they put those PWAs into their store, and like you'll just start seeing download traffic, like direct download or whatever. Like so, these are cool because they're both, right? Like they're a website. So if I just want to go to like starbucks.com or twitter.com, I can just use it as a website. But I have this like opt-in to start using it as a lot more than that, to save it to my home screen, to allow notifications. I think that's like, for me, that's like the power of it, is like you can build it, in any way you want, and people can use it in any way they want, right? So I can be like, this isn't a home screen app, but I'm all about notifications. Or like, this one is home screen, but I don't want to be bothered with that. Like, I have a lot of options, pretty much any number of options, because each one is a separate permissions request. Another big thing is emerging markets. This is like something that I really want to see more data on, because it makes perfect sense, right? So there are a lot of places where the way that we interface with apps is not realistic. So like, we basically always have 3G or better connections on high-end devices. Like Americans just turn over, like a phone's a few years old, they ditch it, they get a new phone. So like, that's kind of what we're sitting with. So the way we use it is pretty standard in the sense that the app store creators are all like a few blocks from here. Cool. So like, another thing that seems to make a lot of sense is like this idea of emerging markets. Like, there's all these places that they interact differently. And like I kind of mentioned before, like, we know of places that they don't have a really good connection when they're out and about. So it's very different for them. They're not going to like see an ad for an app like we do necessarily, and be like, oh, I'm just going to open and download that right now on the bus. Like, that's not really an option for them. And so you start to see all these really unique ways that people interface. You also have people on low-end devices that can't support the space even. That people that like, they have to make a trade. They can have like 4 modern apps on their phone, and so when they want to check out a new one has to go, right? And so you get all these things. And so there's some really cool stories. Like Uber has this really successful progressive web app. It's m.uber.com. And the idea here was very specifically around emerging markets. It was like, we're doing really well in like areas with really good internet connection, and we're really struggling because if you're in that scenario I pointed out before, where you only have good connection inside buildings, inside home or work, how do you get an Uber when you're like, out and about, you're at a bar or something like that, and you want to go home? And so they build this thing, and it's like, the stat on it is like, it's designed to be fast even on 2G. The core app is only 50 kilobytes gzipped and takes less than 3 seconds to load on 2G. And so like, this is like really incredible. I mean, like, the speed at which this thing like kind of bootstraps itself up, and like how much work they've offloaded to the server, and like just the idea that you can be, and I've actually done this before. Just here, I've had times where like I can't load, like I hit the app and it's just spinning, I can't get a connection, and I go to the website for a new, and it just downloads itself. It's like so quick. Again, this isn't necessarily intrinsic to progressive web apps. This is a high performance progressive web app, right? And so those lines kind of blur, right? You can make a progressive web app that passes all of the rules and is huge and slow and doesn't attract emerging markets. But it's a really cool area where you can be like, a lot of people aren't downloading our app and they aren't able to use it when they're out and about. This is like a really cool spot for a progressive web app. Another one, I thought this was cool, Flipkart. They're like another one of the big, a lot of the companies that I'll mention there are kind of the ones that are like really leading the drive with progressive web apps. But what I thought was really cool about them, so they're driving 50% of their new customer acquisition through their app. So that's really cool. And 60% of visitors to the PWA had previously uninstalled the native app to save space. So this really isn't PWA versus native in the sense of, oh, native's stupid. It's not that at all. It's more like, for some people, those native apps aren't an option. And progressive web apps can fill this need, right? Like, if you just don't have enough space for more than a few apps, this can be a really cool opportunity to be like, this is like use it when you want to use it, small download size, progressive web app. And Twitter is another big one, like really trying, this was like happening when I left, like really trying to get into markets that have been really tough to penetrate. And a lot of them, they go there, and a lot of the feedback they get is like, the app's too big, or I don't have enough space, or I don't have the bandwidth to download and install it, or any number of things. And so like, these are like these opportunities here to have a website that's really fast that can also just be instantly saved to your home screen and used again. Okay, so this is going to be a quick, like, the little technical talk, and then we're going to get into what I think is like a little bit more interesting, like the user story stuff. So to get a PWA, first you start with a website, right? So just have your website. It could just be like an HTML page, whatever it is, fine. Then you want to be able to have it add to the home screen. And so this works via a manifest file. That's probably terribly small to see, but it's just a JSON file. You can name it anything you want because you're going to be importing it by its direct name later. And it basically just has like a bunch of things. Let me just read them. So it's like, what should the name be when it saves to your home screen? How do you want it to display? Should it be a total standalone? Should it be wrapped in Chrome still? Should it be portrait mode only, landscape only, all these things? A little description, what icon should show, what background color there should be, just kind of all this stuff that you would think, like, oh, if I'm making a native app that's going to be saved to the home screen, you just fill out this information. And then you simply link to it like this in your HTML file. You do link rel manifest, and then the href is to wherever it is. And just having those things, if you go to an app, You go to your index.html page now on a mobile phone, it'll pop up and it'll be like, oh, like I see a manifest here. Do you want to add it to the home screen? And boom, it just works. And so that's the first step, right? If you want to add it to the home screen, you do those things. Next one is offline mode. This one's really tricky, and I had a lot more slides on it because you have to make a lot of business. There's no one offline mode, right? You have to make a lot of business decisions. But I sort of pulled back on it because I didn't want to get too lost in the woods. But there's this really cool thing by the Google team called Workbox. So I'm going to simplify the technical description by being like, if you don't know everything you want to do, you should check out Workbox. And Workbox integrates with however you build your site. So it's an NPM script or Gulp or Webpack, whatever. You kind of choose through some options, and it generates what is a service worker, and then that enforces your caching policy. And what I mean by like the technical being too hard is like, when do you cache? When do you fetch new? So people have these like strategies where it's like, well, every time you hit the site, we should serve the last version, and then secretly in the background, we should fetch the new version and then dump the last version. And so that's one option, right? And it gets a little tricky maybe if you're debugging the site, because every time you refresh, you'll still see the old version, and you have to refresh twice. Anyway, there's decisions to be made, or maybe it's like see if you're online. If you're online, just get the new version. But if you're not online, serve the cache version. You have some business decisions to make there. Cool. And then once you've made your service worker, you just link it inside JavaScript anywhere in your main application. So you just do this progressively enhanced. You check to make sure it's something that exists, and if it is, you register it. And we can probably have a whole talk about service workers. They're really cool. They're just caching options. Like, what do you cache? Do you cache your images, fonts, CSS, JavaScript? How long do you cache them for? What's your method for recycling them? Like all those kind of decisions. I had a slide that was like a whole service worker that I fit into one slide, but that's not super helpful. Okay, cool. So now you can see, like in this little demo I have here of this really cool Pokedex site. I guess I will let it restart, but in a second it'll restart, and you'll see that I go in the DevTools and I turn it from online to offline, and then I refresh the page. And so this is totally offline. It cached everything. I can still interact with a lot of different stuff. It's really cool. And like I mentioned before, you can get into like really complicated situations where you're like, I actually want to allow, like theoretically you could allow, if you had a WordPress PWA, you could allow people to author a new post. And then when they hit submit on it, you just store it in local storage somewhere. And when you finally get back online again, then it could try syncing it, or things like that. So you can kind of get really fancy with this. Push notifications, same kind of thing. Like it's just got this request permission, and it takes a callback function. And then so basically, I don't have a little screenshot, but you've seen it before where you're like, this website wants to send you notifications, yes or no, basically. And then if yes, then you're able, so you have to do like, you do a check, like if permission is granted, then it's sent it, otherwise it's a no-op. If you try sending it, they said no. Okay, so the basic idea for the technical PWA checklist is like all of your traffic has to be over HTTPS. You have to have somewhat of a mobile-friendly layout, right? Like Lighthouse will do its own like inspection to make sure you don't have like horizontal scroll or whatever. The app has to load fast, which is like a hard term to quantify, but fast according to Lighthouse, even on 3G connections. The app has to work offline. They don't enforce what it does offline, just that it does something. It's not relying on Chrome to show you the dinosaur. And it has to have a manifest file so you can add it to the home screen. So those are kind of like your basics that you need. And again, like a lot of them are up to your discretion how much time you put into all that. Okay, so then like this again, like I mentioned before with Uber, I was like, okay, Uber's got a really fast PWA, but a PWA doesn't necessarily have anything to do with speed, right? You can have a really slow PWA, it's totally your choice. But PWAs get you thinking, oh my gosh, I want to attract all these users in emerging markets and people in developing nations, and ultimately you come back down to like, I need a really fast site, right? I want it to be really, really quick. So there's like some performance stuff, like there's this tool in Chrome. It's pretty new in Chrome, like over the last 6 months, I think it made it into Chrome Stable called Lighthouse. And what they've done is they replaced, for any of you that used to go to like an element inspector and you would see, I think like an audits tab, and it had like 4 options. I can't remember what they were anymore because they're dead to me. Now there's a new option which is like Lighthouse, right? It's like a new performance audit for your site. And it has 2 modes, 4 modes, but the 2 main ones we're going to talk about are website performance, all in all, and then progressive web app checklist. So I think I have like some slide. Yeah. So here it's like you can see we're in Chrome DevTools. We're on the audits tab. We run one, and now we're getting like these scores around like these 4 different categories: accessibility, best practices, and then the 2 that are like really related to PWAs, which is like the progressive web app score and like how fast your site is. And so they provide very similar to the old audit. They just have updated information. They provide like what your score is, why you got that score, some helpful tips. They link to docs. It's like a really powerful tool to like start doing your performance budget.
And the progressive web app checklist is just what I covered earlier. Like, is it all over HTTPS? Do you have a manifest? Does it look good on mobile? Those kind of things. Cool. So then we hop over to the performance budget. It starts giving you some like really good stuff, right? And a lot of this like just touches with like you could start with like the best practices. Like if you're building websites, like do you concatenate and minify all of your source code, and do you send down images that are bigger than you need them to be, and do you losslessly compress them? You know, like all these things, which are like really, really good things that hopefully a lot of people are doing or have some budget to do at their jobs. But it also, like one thing I wanted to point out is there's like general web performance and there's mobile specific performance, right? Because you're in a different world. You're like, one, you're over flaky connections, and two, you're often on less powerful devices. It's not totally true, like our iPhones are like super powerful, but if you're serving traffic to mobile people, you're often going to be having customers that are on weaker CPU, weaker GPU devices. So there's this really great post, which is like one of my favorite posts of all time, and it's by Adi Osmani at Google, and it's called JavaScript Startup Performance. And it really dives into like just really well laid out like information about what is expensive and what makes things slow and all these kind of things. But I wanted to kind of hammer on a few points that are like mobile related. So the first one, this is a slide of how long it takes all these devices. I'm really sorry that the words are so tiny. To parse 1 megabyte of JavaScript code. So this isn't about network. This isn't about how small you make the bundle that you send over with like uglification and minifying and gzip. This is about like, okay, now the phone has it, it's decompressed it, and it needs to run through it, needs to parse it, right? And so again, like this is one of those like tricks where like a lot of people, they're like, oh, I have Webpack, and then I do Uglify, and then I do, like all the minification, and then I pass it all, and I gzip compress all of it. And my bundle is really small, right? It's like, 100 kilobytes or whatever. But it's like, so that's great. That's super excellent because people don't have a lot of bandwidth all the time. But do keep in mind that all that clever stuff you've done, it gets onto the phone, and then they decompress it, and now they're still stuck with all that code. Like, it would always be better if you could cut out some code or a lazy load it or split it into different. Does that make sense? Like, so the parsing is like, that was kind of a big thing from this post that was pretty eye-opening for me. So then basically it's like, as a general rule for all their testing, the parse time was 36% longer for mobile devices on average than desktop devices. So again, like it's just like these older phones, they're weaker. It has nothing to do with network connection. It could be a phone on like really, really good Wi-Fi. It's still just a slower machine than your computer. It's going to take longer to parse that. And then, so all that stuff I said about compression, right? I was like, no matter how small you make it, it doesn't make the parse time any less. But like, so like remember that compressing your files, gzip or Brotli, will help them get to your users faster, but will not help your time to interactive. But it helps a little bit, maybe. And so the trick is here, like, all these browsers are full of really smart folks that are doing all this really incredible stuff, right? And it's kind of hard to keep track with sometimes. So yeah, but the thing is, like, some of these browsers actually do really, really neat stuff, right? Where like, so like you compress and then they get to write all their fancy code for like decompressing your gzip stuff, or you uglify and it actually makes it faster to parse. Like, so there is a connection there. Like, it's just not a one-to-one connection. Like the more that you reduce file sizes, not the faster the parse time will be. But I don't want you to be like, oh, gzip is stupid. No, like the browsers are really smart. It actually does help them out too, some of them. That's like a whole kind of rabbit's nest. I don't even know. They all do different things. But so keep in mind that like after it's been decompressed, that blob size is really important still to your mobile users. So this is another one. Like, this is really interesting. Like, people for the longest time, they were looking at time to first meaningful paint. That was like their metric, right? Like, when does my site look like my site? Like when are the images in, or when is the placement there? And it's like, that's really great, but, and I'm sure you've all experienced this on mobile devices before, how often do you get a page to land and you see the button you want, and you click it, and like nothing happens, and you like, click it again, and it's like, I'm hitting the button, I know I'm hitting the button, and like, but this is because like that thread is blocked, right? Like JavaScript is single threaded, and you're doing this parsing, and like, so now they have this new metric, which I really like. It's called time to interactive. It's like, not only is the site loaded, but when is the thread unlocked where I can actually start doing events and things like that. Just another thing to just be considerate of. And so this is where like big JavaScript blocks can get you into trouble with mobile apps. Okay, so the technical stuff out of the way, this is really like the crux of what I want to talk about, is that like you're left with some really fascinating decisions about how you essentially pitch your app to your potential users now. And so like, on the other side of that, if you make a real native app, like this is like Firefox in the Apple App Store, they very much control your pitch, right? So you get like your screenshot, you get your user ratings, a little description, a title, and you get some other screenshots down there. One time up at bat, right, where you're like, I really want them to click that get button and not click that back button. And that's your whole game, right? And I'm sure those of you at bigger companies have people that agonize over this. They're like, run A/B test where they change the title, they change the description, they see if it goes up or down. they're desperately fighting for better user ratings because the better user rating, but anyway, it's like a high stress situation, right? Where like Firefox, we probably all know, but if it's like some new app, I'm like, why do I even want this thing? Like, I don't know if this is just me, but like, there are apps that I've gone to their app screen like 10 times, and it feels like a big choice. I'm like, do I really want to put this thing on my phone? I don't know anything about it. You have to make all the permission decisions up front. Usually, it's like it's just too much. Which is like. That stinks for app developers, right? Where they're like, just give me a shot. And I'm like, I can't. I can't do that. This is where I think PWAs are like so cool, right? And so like PWAs can like give you just a website, no frills, just use the website. Here's some free stuff, don't worry about it. And then like they can kind of slowly be like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if you got a little notification when this happened? Or I see that you keep looking at the same house listing. Do you want me to email you when the price goes? And you can start like. You have this conversation, right? And I don't mean it to come out in a slimy way where you can like manipulate I mean it in like a cool way, like you provide real value and then you ask for some leeway. You're like, wouldn't it be cool if you use this all the time, put me on your home screen, right?
You get more attractive over time.
Yeah, exactly, sure. But not in a slimy way. Okay, so like on another thing that's so that's like one side, the positive side of the pitch. The negative side of the pitch is we're kind of entering some dangerous territory where the browsers are really starting to rethink how they do these permissions requests. And so on Chrome, what we can kind of see over here is like, this is what you all probably see right now, right? It's like a website wants to show you notifications. You get 3 options, right? You get block, allow, or dismiss, right? And dismiss is who chooses dismiss? You don't want to block them, they might be good people. You definitely don't want to allow it. So dismiss is really nice. It's like the non-committal option. And then Chrome handles the back-off logic. When does it prompt you again? And everything's green. And so then I have like a bunch of sites I just dismiss, like Google. They'll be like, well, I don't know your location. I'm like, I'm not ready for that. Like, not now. Like, just keep. But what's coming soon, which I think is a bummer, is they're getting rid of dismiss. They don't want dismiss anymore. So like in Chrome, it might even be out. I've kind of lost track of time. But if it's not out now, it's sometime soon. Like there will be no more dismiss. There will just be block and allow. And you got to really make a decision, right? And so their theory, and this part I agree with, is their theory is like stop bombarding people with all these permission requests before they even know if they want to use your thing or not. Wait until they want to use your thing and then do it. And I like that, but I kind of don't like the fact that as a user, I'm going to be put in awkward situations where I have to like give up my location or never get that option to do it again. And I don't even know where Chrome will store the setting to let me have that access back. It's kind of scary. So what like some options, like what can you do about the situation where like permissions might become your one shot, much like the Apple App Store or the Android Store, where you get that one opportunity. If they don't want to do it, then you've lost them. So like here's kind of this idea. There are some really good posts by some of the Google engineers about what to do, and I kind of distilled them into this like first, present a value proposition. Like let people use your site. Do not bombard them when they first get there. 2, if you can, have a settings area where they would know how to turn those things back on. Like often like, but I'm okay to give you permission because I know exactly where to go to revoke that permission. That feels safer. 3, which I already covered in number 1, because I'm good at this, is don't bombard them with prompts in the initial page load, right? Let them see, and there's some really good like use cases I'll go through in a minute here, but like let them see that there's something here that they want and make up their mind about that. And then 4, like let them turn those things off, right? Let them opt out. Like I don't like when you bombard somebody with like I need to know your location. I'm like no, and then you're like okay, I'm not serving you the web page. It just feels like it's like a contentious relationship, right? Where I'm like even if it's silly, like Google Maps, let me load the globe view, right? I'm not telling you where I live right now, but let me see what you're all about, and then maybe I'll opt into that location later. But especially for apps that have some static content, like Twitter or Facebook, they can just show the home screen. They don't need to know to send you notifications just to see a logged out home screen or whatever. So I think there's a lot we can do there. And there's some like cool things we've seen. I get why people do this pattern. I also feel like for users it's kind of an anti-pattern, but in response to this Chrome thing, what people have started doing is instead of that request permission dialog, the native dialog, they do their own dialog with like CSS, and they're like, if I were to ask your permission, would you say yes or no, right? And it's like, if you're like, no, it's like, cool, I wasn't going to ask, no problem. But if you say yes, then it's like, okay, like, here's the thing. The only thing I don't like about this is that you're gonna get us twice, right? So that this thing will pop up, I'll be like, heck yeah, I want notifications, and I'll be like, count me in, and then a new thing will pop up, the native one, I'll be like, but do you want notifications? And it's like, so there's no way to like pass, there's no way to do that, but I still think it's pretty cool, and it like lets you like it lets you speak to your customer a little bit. Be like, I'm going to ask you for this, and here's why, and here's what you get from it, kind of thing. And it also allows you to, if you just say no, they can have their own back off, right? Their own thing programmed. Where they're like, okay, the user said no to our notification request. Let's ask again in 10 days, or let's ask again once they purchase something, or you know what I mean. You can have your own logic there. It still feels a little bit like this, like whack-a-mole thing, where it's like we ask yes, no, dismiss, and they're like, well, you can't do that anymore. And it's like, okay, well, we ask yes, no, dismiss, and then if they say yes, then we ask yes, no. Like it just feels like it's still the same thing, right? It's still like a dismissible thing, but at least it is like a clear opportunity to talk to your user. So some cool case studies on this. Housing.com is one of the great progressive web apps, and they ask you to subscribe to notifications only when you start scrolling down to 2/3 of the way through the search results, right? So you go to housing.com, nothing. You type in the search you want, nothing. So you're starting to feel like, cool, this is just a website that's really neat for me or whatever. You start looking, it seems like that search was good because you're scrolling through or whatever, and then they're like, hey, do you want to get some notifications about these things that you're looking at? I think that's really cool. That's like a pretty good way of doing it. And here's like an example of that. You can kind of see that. I'm not at the top. I did my little search, and then scrolling through, and then when I get down, it's like, oh, if you can't find what you're looking for, like hit notifications, and they'll give you updates. Again, it's more than just, can I send you notifications, which is like, why? What are you going to send me? This is like, if you say yes to this, I'll keep that search result stored, and I'll let you know when new properties get added to it. Right? That's way better, right? That's like, oh, I do want that. In a really similar way, the Twitter web app, or the mobile web app, is like if you go to the notifications page, and if you have a notification, then it asks about the push request. They're like, oh, it seems like you're getting some notifications. Would you like the next one of these to be pushed to you? So again, it's like you log into the app, totally silent, you're able to do your thing. You start using it a bunch, still totally silent. You can click on notifications, it's totally silent, until you get your first one. And then it's like the value prop is like, wouldn't you like this pushed directly to your phone so you knew about it earlier? And it's like, oh, that would be kind of nice. I do like doing that. Or, no, that's totally fair. That's a blank slide. Cool, so like, here's kind of...
Pause.
I was like, what have I got myself in? So here's like kind of this example of like, you know, they're like opening this like the Twitter mobile app or whatever. I have a hard time with these GIFs on Google Slides, but we'll see in a second that it looks really native. So like, they're on their Android phone, a push comes in that looks really native to me. They click on it, it opens this app, and takes them right to that page. So like that experience is pretty much identical to what you get if you had the iOS app or the Android app. And it's all just using web technologies that are opt-in. So you can see that it had the notifications one on, but it didn't have the add to home screen on. So they're granular too, right? So like, I guess the workflow I imagine is that you went to the notifications page, it was like, hey, do you want me to show you these from now on in a push? You're like, yes, then you go about your business. A couple hours later, you get a push, then you click it, and now they're like kind of having that value prop. They're like, wasn't that great? Add us to your home screen, so then it's even easier to open us up. You know, it feels kind of nice and potentially slimy. I think it's really nice. Okay, cool. And then, yeah, just my last slide here is like, so there's some official resources. There's the developers.google.com page on what progressive web apps are. They have a really good description. There's this really cool site. I had a few slides in there from PWA stats. It's like a cool opportunity for people to just talk about success stories. And then there's that is service worker ready, or you could do the is PWA ready. Either one of those will keep you on your toes about Safari and what's going on. I don't know your time with this, but I think I'm out of time, so thank you all very, very much.